welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you're joining us as we explore the really incredible world of the Maya civilization.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one.
Thinking about those amazing pyramids, rising out of the jungle, that really detailed writing system,
Yeah,
and just how much they understood about the stars.
exactly. The Maya, they just keep capturing our imagination. And you, our listener, you've told us you're curious about them, their myths, how they built these amazing societies.
Right, and also, why things changed for them, the so-called collapse, and of course, those predictions people always talk about.
Mm-hmm. So our goal today really is to dive into the Maya world. We're going to look at archaeology, historical records.
Just try to piece together a clear picture, right? Who were these people? What's their story?
Exactly. So, okay, let's get started. Where did the Maya story even begin? Geographically?
Good question. Where were they based?
They emerged in the region we call Mesoamerica. Now, that's a pretty big area. Think southeastern Mexico, all of Guatemala and Belize, and then parts of Honduras and El Salvador, too.
Wow. Okay, so not just one type of environment then.
Oh, definitely not. It was incredibly diverse. You had the sort of hot, humid lowlands in the Yucatan, but also the much cooler mountainous highlands in Guatemala. Big contrasts.
And were they isolated? Or interacting with others?
No, they were definitely connected, part of a bigger picture. They had dynamic relationships with other major groups, people like the Olmecs, who were actually around earlier.
Okay.
The really powerful city of Teotihuacan in central Mexico, and then much later on, the Aztecs. So there was trade, ideas flowing back and forth, probably conflict sometimes, too.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, with ancient civilizations, we usually break their history down into periods, right? What are the main chapters for the Maya?
Yeah, that helps keep things organized.
Oh.
Broadly, we talk about the pre-classic period first. That's roughly 2000 BC up to about 250 AD.
Okay, pre-classic.
Before that, there's an even earlier archaic period where agriculture really gets going. Then comes the big one, the classic period, from about 250 AD to 900 AD.
That's the one you hear about most, I think.
Often, yeah. Then follows the post-classic, say 950 AD to around 1539 AD. And finally, you have the contact period, when the Spanish arrived, starting around 1511 and really lasting until, well, the last independent city fell in 1697.
Wow, 1697. That's quite late.
It is. Shows their resilience.
Okay, let's go back to that pre-classic period then. 2000 BC to 250 AD. What were the key things happening?
That was really the foundation building time. You see the first complex Maya societies starting to form. Agriculture gets really established. Corn, beans, squash, chili peppers, the staples.
The basics.
Right. And pottery starts appearing, those distinctive figures too. But what's really key is that by around, say, 750 BC, the first actual Maya cities start popping up with impressive big buildings, monumental architecture.
Cities already?
Yes. And get this, by the 3rd century BC, they developed hieroglyphic writing.
That early?
Ah.
So were there any standout cities back then in the pre-classic?
Definitely. Towards the end of the pre-classic, you get major centers like Kamanaljuyu up in the highlands and the really massive site of El Mirador down in the lowlands. Huge places.
El Mirador, I've heard of that one.
But there's a twist. Around the 1st century AD, something happened. We see this kind of widespread change or disruption. Many of these big early cities seem to have declined or were largely abandoned. We're still not entirely sure why.
Huh. An early mystery. So what happens next? The classic period. You said that's often seen as their golden age.
It really is, yeah. Starting around 250 AD,
Oh, yeah.
one of the defining features is when they start putting up those carved stone monuments, the stelae, often with dates inscribed using their long count calendar.
Ah, the famous calendar.
Exactly. This era sees a real explosion in building, city growth, and just incredible intellectual and artistic achievements, especially in the southern lowland regions.
So big cities, lots of art. Were they all part of one big empire? Or?
No, not really a single empire. It was more like, think ancient Greece or maybe Renaissance Italy, a network of independent city-states. Okay.
They formed alliances, they traded, they fought wars. Big players like Tikal and Calakmul were major rivals, each controlling sort of spheres of influence with smaller cities allied to them.
Like superpowers of their time. How big were these cities?
Pretty substantial. Major centers might have held, anywhere from 50,000 to maybe even 120,000 people. That's a lot of people for that era.
That's huge. Sounds like a busy, complex world. Did anyone else get involved? You mentioned Teotihuacan earlier.
Yes, they did. Teotihuacan, that big power in central Mexico, seems to have had a significant impact, particularly in the early classic. Around 378 AD, there's strong evidence they actually intervened directly in the politics of Tikal and other cities nearby.
Intervened how?
It looks like they might have even helped install new rulers with ties back to Teotihuacan. And after that, Tikal became really dominant for a while in that central area.
Wow. Okay. So ancient political maneuvering. Now we have to talk about the classic Maya collapse. That sounds dramatic. What happened around the 9th century? Yeah, collapse is the word often used, though it's maybe a bit simplistic. What we see in the 9th century AD is a major transformation, particularly in those central and southern lowland
The
areas.
heartland of the classic period.
Exactly. The major cities there are largely abandoned, the ruling dynasties kind of vanish from the records, and there's a definite shift in population and activity, moving northwards.
So why? What caused this huge shift? Was it one big thing?
Almost certainly not just one thing. It was likely a perfect storm, a combination of factors building up.
Like what?
Well, there seems to have been pretty constant endemic warfare between the city-states, which must have taken a toll. Then there's the issue of population. These cities were big, maybe too big for the environment to sustain long term.
Overpopulation leading to environmental damage.
Quite possibly. Deforestation, soil erosion, that sort of thing. And then a really big piece of the puzzle seems to be drought. There's growing evidence for severe, long-lasting droughts hitting the region right around this time, possibly linked to bigger climate shifts.
Warfare, environmental stress, drought. That's a tough combination.
It really is. And maybe the whole social structure, which was so focused on the divine king, the Kuleja, maybe that system just wasn't flexible enough to handle such complex, overlapping crises.
If the king couldn't make it rain or guarantee harvests.
Then their authority, their divine connection, might have been seriously questioned, right? The whole system could unravel.
So the cities emptied out. But did the Maya people just disappear?
No, absolutely not. This is crucial. It wasn't an extinction event. While the big southern cities declined, Maya civilization absolutely continued. It just shifted focus.
Shifted where?
Primarily north into the Yucatan Peninsula. That's where we see the rise of important cities in the next phase, the post-classic period, like the famous Chichen Itza. And Maya communities also continued to thrive in the highland regions.
Okay, so the post-classic period, after 900 AD or so, what was that like? Different from the classic?
Somewhat different, yeah. Maya presence was still very significant, but maybe organized differently. Populations often clustered near reliable water sources, which makes sense after the drought issues.
Smart.
You still get major centers like Chichen Itza, and later on, Mayapan becomes dominant in the north. But this era also seems to have been marked by more instability, more warfare. It was a turbulent time, leading right up to when the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s.
Right, the Spanish conquest. That must have been a massive shock.
Huge. And it wasn't quick. The first contact was around 1511, but the conquest itself was this long, drawn-out process. Lots of different campaigns over many decades.
And you said the last independent city held out until 1697.
That's right, Nochepetin, on an island in Lake Piten Itza. It shows incredible resistance over a century and a half after initial contact.
Incredible. So after all that, the conquest, the earlier collapse,
Yeah.
did Maya culture survive?
It absolutely did, and this is maybe the most important point. Despite everything, conquest, colonization, attempts at suppression, Maya culture endured. It adapted, it persisted. Many communities kept their traditions, their languages.
Languages are still spoken today.
Yes, millions of people in Mexico and Central America today are Maya, speaking Mayan languages, living in many of the same areas their ancestors did. It's a living culture, not just ancient history.
That's amazing. A real testament to their resilience.
Yeah.
Okay, let's backtrack a bit. We talked about the cities. What about the society inside those cities? How was it structured? Who was in charge?
At the top, during the classic period, you had the king, the Kulaja. This translates roughly as divine lord.
Divine Lord. So more than just a political leader.
Oh, much more. They were seen as a crucial intermediary, a link between the human world and the realm of the gods and ancestors. Almost semi-divine themselves, often linked specifically to the maize god, who was super important.
Representing life, fertility.
Exactly. Succession was usually patrilineal, so father to son, typically. And becoming king involved really elaborate ceremonies, big public events with rituals like bloodletting, offering one's own blood, and sometimes human sacrifice, too.
Serious stuff. Who was below the king?
You had other elites, nobles. There were important regional lords, sometimes called sajal, who were loyal to the Kuleja but ruled their own areas. And then you had priests, who held immense knowledge, and the scribes, who were highly respected for their skills in writing.
And the cities themselves, were they laid out on a grid like Roman cities?
Not usually. They tended to grow more organically. You'd have a central core, the ceremonial precinct with the biggest temples, pyramids, palaces, maybe the ball court.
Right.
And then radiating out from that would be residential areas, maybe grouped by family or craft. These different parts were often linked by raised stone roads or causeways called sakbib.
Sakbib. Okay. Let's talk about religion then. You mentioned the divine king, the maize god. What else can we say about their beliefs?
It was a complex system, a huge pantheon of gods and goddesses covering basically every aspect of life and the natural world. Weather, agriculture, birth, death, war, you name it.
Lots of deities to keep track of.
Definitely. And ancestor worship was also incredibly important. They believed their deceased relatives could act as go-betweens with the gods, offering guidance and help.
What about their creation story? Is there a specific text?
Yes. The most famous one we have is the Popol Vuh. It's a truly amazing text, originally from the Quiché Maya of the Guatemalan highlands, written down after the Spanish conquest, but preserving much older traditions.
And what does it say about creation?
It tells how the gods tried several times to create humans. First, they tried making them out of mud, but those just dissolved, couldn't think or speak properly.
Not ideal.
Not ideal. Then they tried carving them from wood. These could walk and talk, but they had no hearts, no minds. They didn't remember their creators, the gods. They were disrespectful.
So what happened to the wood people?
The gods sent a great flood to destroy them, and it said even their own tools and animals turned against them. The survivors, legend says, became monkeys. Finally, the gods succeeded using maize dough. That's why maize was so central. Humans were literally formed from it.
Wow. Made from corn. That's powerful. What kind of rituals did they practice? You mentioned bloodletting and sacrifice.
Those were definitely part of it, particularly for major state ceremonies. But rituals involved many things: offerings of food, jade, feathers, burning incense like copal resin, music, dancing, feasts.
A whole range.
Yeah. And the priests were key. They interpreted signs, oversaw rituals, kept the calendars, tracked the stars, and recorded all this knowledge in books.
Books, like actual books.
Yes, screenfold books made from bark paper, covered in plaster, and painted with their hieroglyphs. We call them codices.
Are many left?
Sadly, no. Only 4 are known to have survived the Spanish conquest and the climate. Most were deliberately destroyed by the Spanish clergy, who saw them as heretical. A huge loss of knowledge.
Tragic. Let's talk about that writing system then. You said it was hieroglyphic.
Yes, but it's more complex than, say, Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Right.
It was a logosyllabic system. That means it used symbols or glyphs that could represent whole words, logograms, but also symbols that represented syllables.
So a mix.
Exactly, a very flexible system. It allowed them to write pretty much anything they could say. We find these inscriptions everywhere, carved on the big stone stelae, painted on pottery in those few surviving codices.
What did they write about?
Lots of things. Royal histories, genealogies, dedicating buildings, recording myths, astronomical observations, prophecies, tax records, probably a whole range. The scribes who could do this were really important, often part of the elite.
Makes sense. And beyond writing, they're famous for math and the calendar too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Their math system was vigesimal, meaning base 20.
Base 20, not base 10 like us.
Right, probably based on counting fingers and toes. And crucially, they independently developed the concept of zero, represented by a shell-like glyph. That was a massive intellectual leap.
0 is a big deal in math.
Huge. And their calendar system, well, it's incredibly intricate. Not just one calendar, but several working together. There's the 260-day ritual calendar, the Tzolk'in.
Okay.
Then the 365-day solar year calendar, the Hob. These two interlocked in a cycle that repeated every 52 years, called the calendar round.
52 years.
And for tracking longer periods, they used the long count. This let them pinpoint dates over vast spans of time, thousands of years. It's how we can date many of their monuments so precisely. And all of this was deeply tied into their religion and astronomy.
So astronomy was key then.
Absolutely central. They were brilliant naked-eye astronomers. They tracked the sun's path, the cycles of the moon, could predict solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy.
Predict eclipses.
Yeah, and they charted the movements of planets, especially Venus, which had great religious significance. All this observation fed into their calendar, their rituals, their understanding of the cosmos. Eclipses, for instance, were often seen as dangerous, potentially bad omens.
Understandable. Okay, let's swing back to those amazing buildings. The architecture. What stands out?
Just the scale and artistry. Towering pyramids, often topped with temples, sprawling palace complexes where the rulers lived and worked, those distinctive eye-shaped ball courts for their ritual ball game,
Right, the ball game.
and even dedicated observatory structures aligned to watch specific celestial events. They mostly used limestone, which was abundant, and developed clever techniques like the corbel arch, basically overlapping stones to create arched ceilings and doorways, since they didn't use the true keystone arch.
Corbel Arch, okay.
Yeah.
Did all Maya cities look the same?
No, there were definite regional styles. In the central P10 area, like Tikal, you get those really tall, steep pyramids with decorative structures on top called roof combs.
Ah, yes, I can picture those.
Then in the Puc region of the Yucatan, you see buildings covered in these intricate mosaic-like stone decorations. And the Chin style features these really elaborate monster mouth doorways. Lots of variation.
Fascinating. And it sounds like we're still finding things. You mentioned LiDAR technology earlier. Tell me about this Valeriana discovery.
Yeah, this is super exciting, relatively recent news. Using LiDAR, basically airborne laser scanning that can see through the jungle canopy, researchers mapped this previously unknown, very large Maya city in Campeche, Mexico. They've named it Valeriana.
And it's big.
It seems to be really significant. Based on the density of structures, they think it might only be second to Calakmul, which was one of the giants. They estimate maybe 30,000 to 50,000 people live there at its peak, around 750 to 850 AD.
That's huge, especially for that time period, which some people think of as part of the decline phase.
Exactly. That's what makes it so interesting. Valeriana seems to have been thriving then. It challenges that old idea that the tropics couldn't support really large, dense, complex societies long term.
What kind of structures did they find?
Pyramids, plazas, ball courts, causeways connecting different areas, even structures that look like possible amphitheaters. It reinforces just how sophisticated Maya urban planning was.
And it makes you wonder.
It absolutely does. It strongly suggests there could be many more significant Maya sites still hidden out there under the jungle, just waiting to be found. Our picture is still incomplete.
Incredible. Okay, before we finish, we absolutely have to touch on the Mayan predictions thing. Especially around 2012, there was so much hype about the Maya predicting the end of the world. What's the real story?
Right, the 2012 phenomenon. Well, the short answer is it's basically a modern misunderstanding or maybe misrepresentation of the Maya calendar.
How so?
The Maya did have the long count calendar, which tracked these really long cycles of time. One of these large cycles, a Baktun cycle, was set to complete its 13th iteration on a date corresponding to December 21st, 2012.
Okay, so a cycle ended.
Exactly. It marked the end of a major time period. But for the Maya, there's absolutely no evidence this meant the end of the world or some kind of apocalypse. It was more like turning over the odometer on a car or celebrating the start of a new millennium. A significant transition point, the beginning of a new cycle, not a final end.
So no ancient prophecies of doom.
None that archaeologists or historians of the Maya recognize. It was about cycles, continuation, renewal, not a cataclysmic ending. The whole doomsday idea was largely a modern invention projected onto their calendar.
Good to clear that up. It felt a bit sensationalized.
Very much so. Their actual calendar system is fascinating enough for its mathematical and astronomical sophistication without needing any doomsday hype.
Absolutely. Well, this has been just incredibly illuminating. A deep dive indeed. To try and sum up, we see this amazing civilization emerge in Mesoamerica, develop over thousands of years.
Reaching incredible heights in the classic period with those cities, the writing, the math, the astronomy.
Then undergoing major transformations, the collapse in the south, the shift north, the long period of resistance against the Spanish.
And a culture that, importantly, didn't disappear but endured and continues today.
And we tackled the myths, right? The creation stories from the Popol Vuh, and debunked the whole 2012 prediction myth.
We did. And that discovery of Valeriana just adds another layer, doesn't it? It shows how much more there might be to learn.
It really does. It leaves you thinking. If a city that large could stay hidden for so long, what other stories, what other entire chapters of human history are still buried, waiting to change what we think we know about the past?
Powerful thought. Keeps the archaeologist busy, that's for sure.
Definitely something for you, our listener, to ponder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.